What was an embarrassing thing you did to impress your crush? Here's the first comment. In high school, I decided to take up magic tricks because my crush mentioned she liked them. I thought it would be a surefire way to win her over. So I spent weeks practicing a few simple tricks that I thought would impress her. The day came when I finally worked up the courage to perform for her and a few of her friends. I went through the first trick smoothly, and she seemed genuinely interested, feeling confident. I decided to try something a little more complex, a card trick that involved her picking a card and me magically revealing it. I went to perform the trick. I got nervous and fumbled the cards. They slipped out of my hands and scattered all over the floor. Everyone around me started laughing, but I tried to play it cool and continue with the trick. Unfortunately, I had completely forgotten the card she picked, and when I guessed, I got it wrong. My crush smiled politely, but I could tell she was more amused than impressed. To make matters worse, one of her friends jokingly asked if I had any more tricks up my sleeve, and I had to awkwardly admit that was all I had. I walked away feeling like a complete fool, and I never attempted magic again. Here's another opinion from the comments. In middle school, I tried to show off my basketball skills to impress my crush during gym class. I wasn't the best player, but I figured I could make a decent impression if I hit a few good shots. So, when it was my turn to play, I went all out, trying to show her that I was athletic and cool. At one point, I got the ball and decided to go for a half-court shot, thinking it would look amazing if I made it. I took the shot, but instead of making it, the ball veered way off course and hit the gym teacher square in the head. The entire class went silent for a moment before everyone burst out laughing. My crush, who had been watching the sidelines, couldn't stop giggling. The gym teacher was fine, but he gave me a stern look and told me to focus more on passing the ball next time. I was so embarrassed that I spent the rest of the class trying to avoid making eye contact with anyone, especially my crush. For weeks afterward, I was known as the guy who couldn't aim and took out the teacher instead of making the shot. Needless to say, my crush wasn't impressed by my basketball skills, and I never attempted another half-court shot again. Let's hear one more. I once tried to impress my crush by writing her a poem. I'd never written poetry before, but I thought it would be romantic and make me stand out. I spent days working on it, trying to find the perfect words to express how I felt. I finally finished it and decided to give it to her during lunch. I waited until we were sitting alone, then nervously handed her the piece of paper. She smiled and started reading, and I watched her face intently, hoping she would be touched by my words. But as she read, her smile started to fade, and I realized with horror that she wasn't reacting the way I had hoped. She finished reading and looked up at me with a slightly confused expression. She said it was sweet, but I could tell she wasn't really impressed. Later that day, I overheard her telling her friends about the poem, and they all had a good laugh about how cheesy it was. One of them even quoted a line and exaggerated how bad it was. I was mortified and avoided my crush for the rest of the week, too embarrassed to face her. The experience taught me that sometimes less is more, and that maybe poetry wasn't my strong suit. I haven't written a poem since. Here's the next comment. In college, I had a huge crush on this girl who was really into fitness. She spent a lot of time at the gym, so I figured the best way to get close to her was to start working out too. The problem was, I wasn't exactly in shape, but I didn't let that stop me. I went out and bought some workout gear, watched a bunch of YouTube videos on exercise routines, and even started eating healthier. After a couple of weeks, I finally felt ready to join her at the gym. I managed to time my workout so that I'd run into her, and when I did, I casually suggested we work out together. She was really nice about it and agreed. We started with some weightlifting, and I tried to keep up with her, but it quickly became clear that I was out of my league. She was lifting way more than I could, and I was struggling to even complete my set. By the time we moved on to cardio, I was completely exhausted. I tried to play it cool, but as we were running on the treadmill, I felt my legs give out. I tripped, fell, and got flung off the treadmill, landing in a heap on the floor. My crush immediately stopped and came over to help me, but I was so embarrassed that I could barely look at her. I mumbled something about being out of practice and tried to laugh it off, but the damage was done. I spent the rest of the session pretending to stretch while she finished her workout. After that, I avoided the gym for a while and tried to find other ways to impress her, none of which involved physical exertion. Here's another opinion from the comments. When I was in middle school, I had a crush on this girl who was really into animals. She was always talking about her pets and how much she loved going to the zoo. I thought the best way to impress her would be to show off how much I cared about animals too. So, when our class got a new hamster as a pet, I volunteered to take care of it, thinking it would make her notice me. I made a big deal about how much I loved animals and how I was going to take great care of the hamster. One day during lunch, I decided to bring the hamster out of its cage to show her how responsible I was. But as soon as I opened the cage, the hamster bolted out and started running around the classroom. I panicked and tried to catch it, but it was too fast. I ended up knocking over a few chairs and desks in the process, causing a huge commotion. My crush and the rest of the class just watched as I chased the hamster around, making a complete fool of myself. Finally, one of the teachers stepped in and caught the hamster, but by then the damage was done. My crush tried to be nice and said it was funny, but I was so embarrassed that I couldn't even look at her. After that, I stayed as far away from the class pet as possible and gave up on trying to impress her with my animal care skills. Here's what someone else did. In high school, I thought it would be impressive to show my crush how tough I was, so I decided to sign up for a hot wings challenge at a local restaurant. My crush loved spicy food, and I figured if I could handle heat, it would make make me look cool and tough in her eyes. The challenge involved eating a dozen of the spiciest wings they offered in under 10 minutes. I had never eaten anything that spicy before, but I was determined to impress her. As soon as I took the first bite, I knew I was in trouble. My mouth was on fire, my eyes started watering, and I couldn't stop coughing. But I didn't want to back down, so I forced myself to keep eating. By the third wing, I could barely taste anything, and my lips were burning. My crush was sitting across from me, watching the whole thing, and I could see the concern in her eyes. I tried to tough it out, but by the time I reached the fifth wing, I was in so much pain that I couldn't continue. I ended up chugging a whole pitcher of water and running to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. My crush followed me to make sure I was okay, but I was so embarrassed that I could barely look at her. I didn't win the challenge, and instead of looking tough, I ended up looking like a fool. After that, I decided that maybe impressing her didn't need to involve burning my taste buds off. Let's hear one more. I once tried to impress my crush by showing off my dance moves at a school dance. I wasn't much of a dancer, but I thought it would be fun to show her I could be spontaneous and confident on the dance floor. I spent the days leading up to the dance practicing in my room, trying to perfect a few cool moves that I could pull off. I figured if I could just get her attention, maybe we could dance together and have a good time. When the night of the dance came, I was nervous but excited. I waited for the right song to come on, and when it did, I went for it. I started dancing in front of her and her friends, trying to look cool and smooth. But as soon as I attempted one of the moves I had practiced, I lost my balance and slipped on the gym floor. I ended up wiping out in front of everyone, and to make matters worse, I knocked over a bunch of chairs in the process. My crush tried to help me up, but I was so embarrassed that I just laughed it off and pretended I wasn't hurt. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the sidelines, watching everyone else have fun while I nursed my bruised ego. The whole experience taught me that maybe I should stick to dancing in the privacy of my own room, where no one could see me fall. Here's the next comment. When I was in elementary school, I had a huge crush on a girl who loved to draw. She was always sketching in her notebook, and her drawings were actually really good. I wasn't much of an artist, but I thought it would be cute if I drew something for her to show that I was interested in her hobbies. I decided to draw her favorite animal, a dolphin. I spent hours working on it, trying to make it look as realistic as possible. Finally, I finished the drawing and nervously showed it to her during recess. She smiled and thanked me, but I could tell she didn't really know what it was supposed to be. My drawing looked more like a blob than a dolphin, and she politely asked if it was a whale or a shark. I was so embarrassed that I just mumbled something about it being abstract and quickly changed the subject. Later that day, I saw her showing the drawing to her friends, and they all had a good laugh about how unrecognizable it was. They weren't mean about it, but it was clear that I wasn't going to impress her with my art skills. I learned the hard way that sometimes it's better to stick to what you're good at, and that drawing wasn't my forte. I never tried to impress anyone with my art again. Here's another opinion from the comments. I once tried to impress my crush by showing off my knowledge of trivia during a game night with friends. My crush was really smart and always seemed to know the answers to random questions, so I figured if I could show her that I was knowledgeable too, she might take notice. I spent the week leading up to the game night brushing up on various trivia topics, thinking I was prepared for anything. When the game night started, I made sure to sit next to her and tried to answer as many questions as possible. At first, I was doing okay, getting a few answers right and feeling pretty confident. But as the night went on, the questions got harder, and I started getting more and more wrong. At one point, I confidently answered a question about history, only to realize after the fact that I had completely mixed up two different events. My crush politely corrected me, but I could see the amused look on her face. By the end of the night, I had made so many mistakes that I just stopped trying to answer questions altogether. I could tell that instead of impressing her, I had come off as someone trying too hard to seem smart. It was a humbling experience, and I realized that maybe next time I should just focus on being myself instead of trying to prove something. Here's what someone else did. In middle school, I had a huge crush on this girl who was really into theater. She loved acting and was always talking about the latest play she was involved in. I figured the best way to get close to her was to join the school play. Even though I had never acted before, I thought it would be a great way to spend time with her and maybe show her that I had hidden talents. When I auditioned, I was so nervous that I could barely remember my lines, but somehow I managed to get a small part. I was excited to be in the play with her and thought it would give us a chance to bond. However, during the first rehearsal, I realized that acting was a lot harder than I thought. I kept forgetting my lines, missing my cues, and generally making a fool of myself. On opening night, I was a nervous wreck. When it was my turn to go on stage, I completely froze. My mind went blank, and I forgot all my lines. I just stood there in silence until the director had to whisper my lines to me from the side. My crush was in the audience, and I could see her trying not to laugh. I was mortified, and after the play ended, I avoided her for the rest of the night. The whole experience taught me that maybe theater wasn't for me, and that trying to impress someone by stepping out of my comfort zone wasn't always the best idea. Let's hear another story. In high school, I had a crush on a girl who was into environmental causes. She was always talking about recycling, reducing waste, and saving the planet. I wanted to impress her by showing that I cared about the environment too. So I decided to organize a cleanup event at a local park. I spent weeks planning it, making flyers, and convincing my friends to come and help out. The day of the event, I was excited and thought it would be the perfect way to show her that we had common interests. I made sure to invite her, and she actually showed up, which made me even more nervous. I tried to act cool and confident, confident as we started picking up trash around the park. Everything was going smoothly until I accidentally stepped in a huge pile of dog poop. My shoes were covered in it, and the smell was unbearable. My crush saw the whole thing and tried to hold back her laughter, but I could tell she was amused. I was so embarrassed that I didn't know what to do, so I just mumbled something about needing to go clean my shoes and left the event early. The worst part was that the event was supposed to be about helping the environment, but all anyone remembered was the guy who stepped in dog poop. Needless to say, I didn't win any points with my crush that day. Here's another comment. Wah. In middle school, I had a crush on a girl who was really into music. She played the piano and was always talking about her favorite composers and songs. I thought it would be cool to impress her by learning how to play the guitar, even though I had never played an instrument before. I saved up my allowance, bought a cheap guitar, and started teaching myself how to play using online tutorials. After a few weeks, I thought I was ready to show her what I had learned. I invited her over and nervously told her I had a surprise for her. I pulled out the guitar and started playing the only song I knew, which was a simple 3-chord tune. Unfortunately, my nerves got the better of me, and I kept messing up the chords. The guitar sounded out of tune, and my fingers were slipping all over the place. My crush tried to be supportive, but I could tell she was struggling not to laugh. When I finished, she smiled and said it was a good try, but I could see in her eyes that she wasn't impressed. The whole thing was so embarrassing that I didn't touch the guitar again for months. I learned that maybe trying to learn an instrument just to impress someone wasn't the best idea, especially if you're not naturally musically inclined. Here's another person's experience. I tried to impress my crush by joining the debate team in high school. She was one of the top debaters, and I thought it would be a great way to spend more time with her and show off my speaking skills. The problem was, I had never done any public speaking before, and I was terrible at thinking on my feet, but I figured I could fake it until I made it. During my first debate, I was up against a senior who was known for being a great debater. I was so nervous that I could barely focus on what he was saying. When it was my turn to speak, I started rambling incoherently, trying to make my points but failing miserably. I kept contradicting myself and getting flustered, and I could see my crush watching from the audience with a concerned look on her face. By the time I finished, I knew I had lost the debate. My crush tried to encourage me afterward, saying it was a good effort, but I could tell she wasn't impressed. So embarrassed that I didn't go to the next debate meeting and eventually quit the team altogether. It was a tough lesson in not trying to impress someone by doing something you're not good at. Here's the last story. In high school, I had a crush on a girl who was really into art. She was always drawing and painting, and she even had some of her work displayed in the school art show. I thought it would be a good idea to try and impress her by entering the art show myself, even though I had never really been into art. I spent weeks trying to come up with something to create, but nothing seemed to work. Finally, I decided to make a sculpture out of clay. I had never worked with clay before, but I thought it couldn't be that hard. I spent hours trying to mold the clay into something that resembled a person, but it just looked like a lumpy mess. When the day of the art show came, I nervously set up my sculpture next to all the amazing paintings and drawings, hoping my crush would at least appreciate the effort. When she came by to look at the exhibits, she stopped at my sculpture and just stared at it for a moment. I could see the confusion on her face as she tried to figure out what it was supposed to be. Finally, she smiled and said it was interesting, which I knew was code for not good. I was so embarrassed that I quickly made an excuse to leave and spent the rest of the day avoiding the art show altogether. The whole experience taught me that maybe I should stick to what I'm good at and leave the art to the artists.